The hall grew silent. The large hall was filled with people from many walks of life. There were leaders, students, business minds, and ordinary families who had come to witness a gathering that promised to be more than just another event. The stage was bright with light, and the air carried a quiet sense of respect. Everyone knew something memorable was about to happen, but no one expected that the moment would touch millions around the world. Narendra Modi walked slowly onto the stage, his steps calm yet filled with purpose. He was not there only as a leader, but as a man ready to show the meaning of honor and humility. The audience watched him closely, and even the smallest sound in the hall seemed louder than usual. Beside him was Sundar Pichai, the CEO known for leading one of the most powerful companies in the world. But what stood out was not his title. It was the gentle way he carried himself, the quiet smile, and the simple warmth in his eyes. The two men greeted each other and the crowd clapped with respect, but the real story was yet to unfold. In the front row sat Sundar's family. His mother, who had supported him when success was just a dream, and his father, who had sacrificed so much so his son could learn. Also, there were Sundar's wife and children, quietly proud, yet humble as ever. They never sought the spotlight, but today they were about to be placed at the very heart of it. And in that single act, millions would understand that true greatness does not come from power or wealth, but from respect for those who shaped us. The hall became quiet again when Narendra Modi turned his gaze to Sundar's family. Instead of speaking to the audience, he walked toward them. People leaned forward in surprise. No one knew what he was about to do. The cameras followed his steps. The tension rose like a wave, and the silence became so deep that even the sound of his footsteps echoed like a drumbeat of suspense. Modi stopped in front of Sundar's parents. His hands folded, his eyes soft, he bowed slightly to them. It was not the bow of a leader to another leader. It was the bow of a human being honoring the roots of another man's journey. The hall gasped, and some people stood without realizing. The audience could feel the weight of the moment. Here was the Prime Minister of a nation bowing before a family, reminding everyone that greatness is never built alone. Behind every success stands sacrifice, love, and resilience. Sundar's mother held her hands together, tears filling her eyes. His father's lips trembled, yet his face carried pride so quiet and deep that it felt like an unspoken story of years of struggle. Sundar himself stood still, almost unable to believe what was happening. For a man who had spoken to presidents and leaders around the world, this was different. This was his family being honored in a way words could never fully describe. The audience began clapping, but it was not ordinary clapping. It was a slow rise, like a wave of hearts joining together. Some people had tears in their eyes, some held their breath, and many whispered to each other that they had never seen such humility from a leader. This was not politics, not ceremony. This was humanity in its purest form. In that moment, Narendra Modi and Sundar Pichai were not just figures of power and technology. They were sons, fathers, and human beings connected by respect. Sundar stepped forward, touched by emotion. He could not hide. He placed his hand gently on his mother's shoulder and whispered something only she could hear, but the cameras caught the tear that slipped down his cheek. He turned toward Modi, and for a moment, the two men looked at each other. No words were needed. The silence between them spoke louder than any speech could. It told the story of respect that goes beyond achievements, titles, and borders. Just as the hall thought the moment was complete, Modi lifted the microphone. His voice was calm, yet it carried through every corner. He said, "Today, I do not honor only Sundar Pichai. I honor the roots of his life. I honor the hands that shaped him, the sacrifices that lifted him, and the values that guide him. His family is not just his support. They are a lesson for all of us. Behind every success, there is a silent strength, often unseen but never forgotten. The audience erupted in applause again, but this time it was louder, filled with both pride and emotion. Sundar's children clapped with innocent smiles, not fully understanding but sensing the love in the room. Sundar's wife wiped a tear, her heart heavy with the weight of gratitude. And Sundar himself felt a deep truth that no matter how far a man goes, the respect given to his family is the highest honor he can ever receive. The moment spread beyond the hall. Cameras carried it to millions of screens across the world. People who watched from their homes felt as if they were part of it. Some whispered to their families, "Look, this is respect." Some sent messages to their parents thanking them quietly. Others sat in silence, reflecting on their own journeys, their own sacrifices, their own roots. The moment was no longer about two men on a stage. It had become a mirror for millions to see themselves. And as the applause filled the hall once, again, a story had just begun. A story not of power, but of humility. Not of fame, but of kindness. Not of one man, but of every parent, every family, every sacrifice that quietly lights the path to greatness. This was only the beginning, and everyone in that hall knew they were witnessing history written not in books, but in hearts. Whispers beyond the applause. When the applause finally began to fade, the hall settled into a stillness that was heavy, yet comforting. The people had seen something unforgettable, but in the silence, questions began to rise in their minds. What had inspired Narendra Modi to step down from the stage and bow to Sundar's family in such a way? Was it only a gesture of respect, or was there a deeper meaning behind it? Sundar stood close to his parents, his hand steadying his father's arm. While his mother kept wiping tears, she could not stop. The cameras continued to circle around them, but the family seemed unaware. They were caught in a flood of memories. Sundar's mother remembered the days when she stayed awake at night, sewing clothes for neighbors just to save enough for his school books. His father remembered the long walks he took, refusing to buy a bus ticket so he could save that small money to pay for his son's education. Now the world was watching, and their sacrifices were no longer silent. Narendra Modi returned to the center of the stage, his eyes still gentle, but his expression more serious. "Many people see greatness as something built on wealth or fame," he said, his voice steady. "But real greatness is built on roots. Today, we honor not just the man who leads one of the world's biggest companies, but also the unseen journey that brought him here." The hall clapped again, though softer this time, as if they were listening with their hearts instead of their hands. Sundar looked at his parents and then at the Prime Minister. He wanted to speak, but he could feel his throat tighten. How could he put into words the gratitude, the love, the endless silent sacrifices that had shaped him? Finally, Sundar stepped forward. The microphone was placed in his hand, and for a brief second, the hall waited in silence, holding its breath. Sundar looked at the crowd, then at his family. His voice trembled, but he spoke slowly, clearly. "I was once a boy who did not even have enough to buy a proper notebook," he said. "I grew up in a house where electricity failed more often than it stayed. But my parents never let me believe that dreams were impossible. They showed me that even in struggle, there can be resilience. Even in silence, there can be strength. Today, whatever I am, it is because of them." His words struck the audience deeply. People began to whisper to each other. Some nodded with heavy hearts, thinking of their own parents. Others wiped quiet tears. One student in the back row whispered, "He is like us. He knows what it means to dream when you have nothing." But just as the moment felt calm, an unexpected voice from the crowd broke the silence. A man stood up, his face sharp, his voice loud. "But tell me," he said, "is honor enough? Many leaders speak of respect, but they forget the struggles of ordinary people once they gain success. What makes this moment any different?" The hall froze. No one had expected such a bold interruption. The security guards moved quickly, But Narendra Modi lifted his hand, stopping them. He looked at the man with calm eyes and said, "Let him speak." The man's words cut through the air. Millions of families in this country struggle every day. Fathers give up meals, mothers work through pain, children dream without support. But only a few are honored. What about the rest? What about those parents who never see recognition? What about those children who are forgotten? The crowd murmured, torn between agreement and discomfort. It was a question that carried both truth and pain. Sundar looked at the man and his heart beat faster. He knew this was no ordinary interruption. It was the voice of many unheard people. Narendra Modi stepped forward again. His voice remained steady, but there was a weight behind every word. "You are right," he said. "There are millions of untold stories. Tonight, this stage honors one family, but it is not only for them. It is a reminder for every child who is studying by candlelight, every parent who is sacrificing quietly, and every dream that feels far away. Tonight, this family represents all of them. And if we forget that, then this moment has no meaning." Parini, hall erupted with applause, stronger than before. Yet, in the silence that followed, Sundar took the microphone again. "Sir," he said softly, turning toward the man who had spoken, "you are right too. My story is only one among millions. But I promise you, I will do what I can so that other families are not forgotten. I will make sure my success is not just for me, but for those who are still on the journey." The man looked at Sundar, his anger softening into quiet respect. Slowly he sat down, his eyes moist, his expression changed. The tension in the hall melted, replaced with a deeper connection between everyone present. The cameras zoomed in on Sundar's parents. Their faces showed pride, but also humility. It was as if they were silently reminding their son that promises are easy to make but hard to keep. Sundar understood that. And deep inside, he knew this night was not only about honor, it was about responsibility. And as the applause rose once again, a new layer of the story unfolded. It was no longer just about respect. It was about the weight of promises, the silent struggles of millions, and the question that would stay in every heart. When one man is honored, can it truly mean honor for all? The promise tested, the applause echoed through the hall, but Sundar's heart was restless. His words had been honest, his promise real, yet he knew promises were only the beginning. As he held the microphone in his hand, he felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Thousands of eyes watched him. And beyond the cameras, millions more would see this moment. What he said now, what he did next, would decide if his words were remembered or forgotten. He looked at his family once more. His father's gaze was steady, but behind it was a question. Could his son truly carry the burden he had just taken upon himself? His mother's hands trembled, as if she remembered the endless nights of sacrifice, and she silently prayed that her son's strength would be more than just words. Narendra Modi, standing at Sundar's side, sensed his struggle. He placed a hand gently on Sundar's shoulder and said, "A promise is like a seed. Once spoken, it must be watered with action, or it will dry and disappear. The world is watching you, Sundar. But more important than the world, your own heart is watching you." The words struck Sundar deeply. He nodded slowly, then turned back to the audience. "Tonight," he said, "I stand not only as a man honored, but as a man challenged. I promise to use every strength I have, every chance I get, to create doors for others. I will not forget the children who study in silence, the parents who give up their dreams for their children's future. I will do what I can, not tomorrow, but starting now." The hall rose in applause once again. But while most clapped, a few in the crowd exchanged doubtful glances. One whispered, "They always say this, but nothing changes." Another murmured, "We will see if his actions match his words." The seeds of doubt had already been planted, and Sundar knew it. Later that evening, after the event ended, Sundar sat with his family in a quiet corner of the hall. The lights had dimmed, the cameras were gone, and only a few voices remained in the distance. Sundar's mother looked at him with soft but firm eyes. "My son," she said, "respect is not earned on stages. It is earned in the silent corners of life where no camera is watching. Remember that." His father added, "People will not measure you by your speeches. They will measure you by the changes they feel in their lives. If you promise, you must act. And if you act, you must not stop halfway." Sundar listened carefully, their words sinking into his heart like stones into a river. He knew his parents were right. This was not just a moment of honor. It was the beginning of a test that would last far longer than one night. But just as the family spoke quietly, another figure approached. It was the man who had stood earlier and questioned the moment. His face was calmer now, his steps slower. Sundar stood as he reached them. "I spoke harshly," the man said, "but I spoke for many. I have seen promises made and broken. I hope you are different. But know this, if you truly mean your words, there are people who will walk beside you. You will not be alone." The man extended his hand. Sundar shook it, feeling the warmth of sincerity. "Thank you," Sundar said softly. "Then let us begin not as strangers, but as people who share the same dream." His words were simple, but in that moment something changed. The man nodded and walked away, but his eyes carried a quiet hope. When Sundar turned back, his wife touched his arm gently. "You spoke of responsibility," she said, "but responsibility will not wait. Already the world is asking, what will Sundar Pichai do next?" Those words echoed in his mind long after they left the hall. As their car drove away, as the streets blurred past the window, Sundar sat silently, his thoughts heavy. The honor he had received tonight was real, but so was the challenge. He remembered his father's sacrifices, his mother's tears, his wife's words, and the man's warning. Sundar knew this was no longer just about him. It was about every nameless parent, every struggling student, every silent dream. And as he looked out into the night sky, he whispered to himself, "Now begins the test of my promise." What Sundar did not know was that the test would come sooner than he expected. Within days, events would unfold that would force him to choose between comfort and commitment, between silence and action, and the world once again would be watching. The first trial, the night after the event, Sundar barely slept. The applause still echoed in his mind, but louder than applause was the question. How would he turn his promise into action? He had spoken, before millions, but words without deeds would fade like smoke. Deep inside, he knew the test of his promise was coming. 2 days later, the first trial arrived. Sundar was scheduled to meet young students at a small school in Delhi. It was not a grand hall filled with lights and cameras. It was a simple building with cracked walls, dusty windows, and benches worn down from years of use. Yet the moment he entered, the children's faces lit up like stars. They had heard of the man who came from a modest home and rose to lead one of the biggest companies in the world. They looked at him with wide eyes, filled with hope. Sundar walked among them, slowly, his heart heavy. He saw a boy writing on paper so thin it tore under the pencil. He saw a girl with shoes too small for her feet, but her eyes glowed with determination. Another child clutched a single book so old the pages were falling apart. Sundar stopped, his throat tightening. These children were just like him once. The silence of his own childhood returned. Nights without electricity, mornings filled with struggle, yet dreams that refused to die. One of the teachers, an elderly man with gentle eyes, spoke softly. "Sir, these children have dreams, but they have little else. Some walk miles every day to reach this place. Some study on empty stomachs. They need more than encouragement. They need opportunity." Sundar looked at the teacher, then at the children again. He remembered his own father walking long distances to save a few coins. He remembered his mother's sleepless nights. He felt the weight of his promise pressing harder. A small boy stood up, his voice timid but clear. "Sir," he said, "can we also do what you have done? Or is it only for people with money?" The hall went silent. Sundar bent down to the boy's level, looking him in the eye. "You can," he said gently, "but you should not have to fight alone. It is my duty to make sure the path is less painful for you than it was for me. Your dreams are not small. They are the future." The boy smiled faintly, but Sundar could see the doubt hidden behind it. He knew words were not enough. He stood, looked at the teachers, and then spoke to everyone. "I made a promise 2 nights ago. Tonight, it begins. I will start a program here, and in many schools like this, to give you better books, better technology, and better chances. But it is not only about tools, it is about respect. Each of you matters, and I will make sure the world knows it." The teachers clapped softly, but it was the children's faces that struck him most. For the first time, their eyes carried more than hope. They carried belief. But just as the room filled with warmth, another voice broke through. It was from a visitor standing at the back, a local official. His words were sharp, filled with doubt. "You speak beautifully, Sundar," he said, "but do you realize the obstacles? Do you realize how many promises fail because of corruption, because of politics, because of lack of follow-through? Will you still stand when the resistance begins?" The room grew tense. Sundar turned toward him, his face calm but firm. "Yes," he replied. "I know it will not be easy, but I also know what it means to struggle. And if I could rise from it once, I can fight for these children now. The road will not break me. Their dreams are too important." The official said nothing more, but his expression showed both challenge and curiosity. Sundar understood. His real test would not be the applause of the children, but the walls built by doubt and resistance. That night, as he left the school, Sundar sat quietly in the car with his wife. She held his hand gently and whispered, "You began tonight, but beginnings are always tested. Are you ready for what comes next?" Sundar looked out the window at the dark streets. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "Promises are easy, actions are hard." He tightened his grip on his wife's hand and whispered back, "I am ready." But deep inside, he wondered if he truly was. For unseen forces were already moving, preparing to test not only his promise, but his resilience, his humility, and even his faith in kindness itself. Shadows of resistance. The morning after his visit to the school, Sundar woke up with a stronger sense of purpose. He had taken the first step, but he also knew the path ahead would be filled with storms. His phone was already buzzing with messages. Some praised his decision, some doubted it, and a few carried warnings. As he scrolled through the news, Sundar noticed how quickly his promise had spread. Newspapers showed pictures of him with the children, and headlines spoke of hope. But not all voices were kind. Some articles questioned if his move was only for show. Others claimed he would forget the children once the cameras turned away. The doubts were louder than he expected, and they stung him deeply. His father noticed the look on his face during breakfast. "Criticism is the shadow of responsibility," he said quietly. "You cannot walk toward light without your shadow following. Do not let it weaken you. Let it remind you to stay true." Those words gave Sundar strength, but his day had more trials waiting. Later that evening, He attended a closed meeting with several local officials and business leaders. He wanted to discuss his new program to support schools like the one he had visited. The meeting began with polite smiles, but it did not stay that way for long. One official leaned back in his chair, his voice filled with doubt. "Your ideas sound noble, Sundar," he said. "But the reality is harsh. Funds disappear, systems fail, people resist change. You may put in effort, but the ground is hard, and dreams rarely survive it." Another added, "Why invest so much into schools for the poor? Focus on the talented few, not on the masses who will never reach high places." Sundar listened silently, but each word felt like a strike against his heart. He remembered the small boy who had asked if dreams were only for people with money. These voices in the room were the same walls that boy had spoken of. Sundar stood slowly, his voice calm yet steady. "I was once part of the masses you speak of," he said. "If my parents had believed dreams were only for the rich, I would not be standing here today. Talent is not owned by wealth. It is hidden in every child, waiting for a chance. And I will not allow doubt to decide who deserves that chance." The room grew quiet, but not all were convinced. One official smirked and replied, "You speak like a leader, but you are only a guest here. Your influence may inspire for a while, but it will not break the system." Narendra Modi, who had silently listened until then, finally spoke. His voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Systems are not broken by silence. They are broken by persistence. I have seen Sundar's journey. He is not here for applause. He is here to fight for those who have no voice. And if you think he will stop, you have not understood his strength." The upper officials exchanged uneasy glances. The weight of the Prime Minister's words silenced their resistance, at least for that moment. After the meeting, Sundar walked out with Modi by his side. The night air was cool, but Sundar's mind was heavy. "Sir," he said softly, "I fear I am walking into storms larger than me." Modi looked at him with calm eyes. "Storms will come, Sundar. They will test your patience, your resilience, your kindness. But storms also reveal what is unshakable. Do not fear them. Stand through them." Those words stayed in Sundar's heart as he returned home. His mother was waiting by the door, her eyes filled with quiet pride. She touched his forehead and whispered, "Strength is not in raising your voice, my son. It is in not letting your heart harden, even when the world resists." Sundar closed his eyes, feeling her words sink deep into his soul. He knew the shadows of resistance would not disappear quickly, but he also knew his promise could not bend. He had to move forward no matter how hard the road became. Yet what he did not know was that the next test would not come from strangers or officials. It would come from within his own circle, from someone he trusted. And that betrayal would hurt more than all the doubts of the world. Betrayal within for days, Sundar worked restlessly on his vision. He spoke with schools, teachers, and young students. He met business leaders, urging them to support. He began building a plan that could reach thousands of children, giving them tools he never had as a boy. Slowly, the dream started to take shape. But as the dream grew, so did the resistance. Whispers began to spread that Sundar's program was too ambitious, that it would drain resources, that it was not practical. Sundar ignored most of them until one evening when the whispers reached his ears from a source he least expected. An old friend of his, someone he had trusted since his college days, was speaking against him. This man had once stood beside Sundar in struggles, but now he was telling others that Sundar's promises were only for show, that his program would collapse, and that he was chasing praise instead of real change. When Sundar first heard it, he refused to believe. "Not him," he whispered to his wife. "He knows me. He knows my heart. Why would he say such things?" But the proof was clear. The words had spread in meetings, and some leaders had already begun to step back from supporting Sundar's idea. Betrayal had struck deeper than any outside doubt. Sundar felt his chest tighten. The pain was not in the criticism, but in knowing it came from someone he once called a brother. That night, Sundar sat alone on the balcony of his home. The city lights stretched far, but his heart felt dark. His father came quietly and sat beside him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, his father said, "The hardest blows do not come from enemies, but from friends who forget your truth. Do not let bitterness swallow you. A heart filled with bitterness cannot lead with kindness." Sundar looked at him, his eyes heavy. "But how do I move forward when even those close to me doubt me?" His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "By remembering who you are. You were never a man who walked for applause. You walked for purpose. Do not stop now because one voice turned against you. If your roots are strong, storms cannot uproot you." The next day, Sundar decided to face the betrayal directly. He called his old friend and asked to meet. They sat in a quiet room, the tension thick in the air. Sundar looked at him, searching his face for answers. "Why?" Sundar asked softly. "Why would you say such things about me? After all the roads we walked together, after all the times you saw my struggles? Why now?" His friend looked away, his expression mixed with anger and shame. "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that you would rise so high that you would forget people like me. Afraid that your dream would leave me behind. So I told myself it was better to doubt you than to believe and be disappointed." Sundar's heart ached, but he did not raise his voice. "If you had spoken to me, I would have told you that my dream is not for me alone. It is for all of us. It is for every child who dares to dream. Betrayal hurts, my friend, but it hurts most when it comes from fear instead of truth." The man's eyes filled with tears, but he said nothing. Sundar stood, his voice firm but calm. "I will not carry anger for you, but I will not stop for you either. My promise stands, and I will walk forward even if I walk alone." He left the room, his heart still heavy, but his spirit unbroken. The betrayal had wounded him, yet it also sharpened his resolve. He understood now that even kindness would face doubt, even sincerity would face suspicion. But true strength was not in avoiding pain. It was in carrying it and moving forward anyway. That night, as he prepared for another long day of work, Sundar whispered to himself, "If my promise is to mean anything, it must survive even betrayal." And, in the distance, unseen by him, forces continued to gather. Resistance was not finished. The final test, the heaviest of all, was waiting. One that would demand not only his strength, but the very core of his humility and kindness. The final test. The days turned into weeks, and Sundar's work grew larger than even he had expected. Schools began to receive support. Children started to get better books. Computers were sent to classrooms that had once only known chalk and dust. The small spark he had lit was slowly becoming a flame of hope. But with growth came the heaviest storm. One evening, Sundar was informed that a major partnership for his program had collapsed. Powerful people had pulled back support. Whispers returned, louder than before. Some said, "His plan is falling apart." Others declared, "We knew it was only words." The very dream he had promised was now on the edge of breaking. Sundar sat in his office, the papers of his project spread before him, his head heavy in his hands. He thought of the boy who had asked if dreams were only for the rich. He thought of the children whose eyes had carried belief after his visit. If the program collapsed now, their belief would collapse too. His wife entered quietly and placed a cup of tea beside him. She looked at him with gentle eyes and said, "You are not fighting for applause, Sundar. You are fighting for children who cannot fight for themselves. Storms will come, but promises tested in storms become unshakable. Her words lit a small strength inside him, but the final test still waited. The next morning, Sundar was invited to stand again in front of the same hall where Narendra Modi had first honored his family. The hall was filled once more, but this time the air was heavy with doubt. Reporters whispered. Leaders exchanged cold glances. The world was waiting to see if Sundar would stand or fall. When he stepped onto the stage, the silence was sharp. No applause rose this time. People wanted answers, not words. Sundar looked out at the crowd, then at his parents in the front row, their eyes steady. He took a deep breath and began to speak. I stand before you not as a man without failures, but as a man who refuses to let failures end the journey. Yes, partnerships collapsed. Yes, resistance grew stronger. But let me tell you this, dreams do not collapse when systems fail. Dreams collapse only when we give up on them. And I will not give up. Not for myself. Not for the children who wait. Not for the parents who sacrifice quietly every day. His voice grew stronger, filled with truth. When I was a boy, my father walked miles so I could study. My mother worked silently so I could learn. They never stopped, even when life was cruel. And tonight, I will not stop either. This is not my program. This is our promise to every child, every family, every silent dream. For a moment, the hall remained silent. Then something unexpected happened. The man who had once stood and questioned him rose again. But this time, his voice was not sharp. It was steady, filled with respect. I doubted you, Sundar, but you stood firm. You did not run from storms. Tonight, I stand with you. Others began to rise. First a few, then many. Applause filled the hall once again, not out of politeness, but out of belief. Tears filled Sundar's mother's eyes. His father's lips trembled with pride. His children clapped with innocent joy, and his wife smiled through her tears. Narendra Modi stepped forward, his eyes shining. He placed his hand on Sundar's shoulder and said, You have shown the world that humility is stronger than pride, resilience is stronger than doubt, and kindness is stronger than resistance. Tonight, you did not just honor your promise, you reminded millions that greatness begins with respect. The hall erupted in applause so strong it shook the walls. Cameras carried the moment across the world. People watching in their homes whispered to themselves, This is what leadership means. This is what respect looks like. And as the night ended, Sundar stood quietly with his family. He did not feel like a man honored on a stage. He felt like the boy he once was, standing in a small home with dreams bigger than his world. Except, now those dreams were not only his, they belonged to millions. In that moment, Sundar understood the true meaning of his journey. Honor was not in applause. Success was not in titles. Greatness was in keeping promises, even when storms tried to break them. Greatness was in honoring the silent sacrifices of families and in never letting hope die. And so the story that began with respect ended with something greater. It ended with millions touched, millions inspired, and millions reminded that humility, resilience, and kindness are the roots of true greatness.